Previously on the Pestle.
Okay, just for a minute straight, show the shot of him hoisting that guy.
Yeah, so I'm assuming it was the baby that really, messed you up?
Now let's dim the lights and start the show.
Welcome, everybody, to the Pestle. Today's show is brought to you by Miss Patty's School of Ballet. Get the scoop and a twirl at the best bar in town at Miss Patty's School of Ballet. Welcome, everyone, to the Pestle. I am Wes.
And I am Todd.
Was it the baby? And we're filmmakers. We like to talk film and tease it apart, help us in our own storytelling and whatnot. And I don't know, we might have a thing or two to discuss today. So let's dive right in, man. What are we covering today?
Today we're covering Nosferatu, the new Robert Eggers film that's out in theaters as we're recording this. So if you haven't seen the film, please pause this episode and go watch it because we're going to spoil a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, we'll touch on some of the cinematography, discuss wide framing and its impact on the story, as well as story and writing, talk about some character development, and other such stuff and things and stuff.
And a quick synopsis of the film. A gothic tale of obsession between a haunted young woman and the terrifying vampire infatuated with her, causing untold horror in its wake. Screenplay written for the screen and directed by Robert Eggers, inspired by the Nosferatu screenplay from Henrik Galeen and Bram Stoker's novel Dracula. Cinematography by Jarin Blaschke. It's featuring Lily Rose Depp as Ellen Hutter, Nicholas Hoult as Thomas Hutter, Bill Skarsgård as Count Orlok, Willem Dafoe as the Professor, Ralph Ineson as the Doctor, Aaron Taylor Johnson as Friedrich Harding, and Emma Corrin as Anna Harding.
Come to me. Come to me. A guardian angel. A spirit of comfort. Spirit of any celestial sphere. Anything. Hear my call. Come to me.
So I think this is only the third vampire film we've covered. And the first two run the gamut. We've done Let the Right One In, and we've also done Twilight. So we're
Streams.
1-1 on the whole vampire genre here. And so how did Nosferatu sit with you in terms of how do you feel about vampire stories in general, I guess? And does this sit well in the vampire genre for you?
So I'm trying to collect all my thoughts. I try to collect all my thoughts because there's, a lot with this, but I'll try to, I'll just condense it. Let's just have a conversation about this. So I'm not talking.
The whole thing is going to be that. Yes.
Okay. All right, cool. In general, vampires are tired for me. I will say that I like this approach that Robert Eggers took, where I was worried that it was going to be, we're never going to see him. That is going to be, this kind of ethereal thing that just exists. And it was a metaphor. He's a metaphor for the plague, and there was a little bit of that, but it wasn't all of that, which I really liked. I liked everybody's dying in the town because the rats that had the plague came, and so maybe that could possibly explain, why people of that day maybe thought that something was going around killing everybody, but it was really the plague.
Yeah, and I really love that whole approach of just discussing, right, superstition as an explanation and a rationale for the things we don't understand. That's a really fun direction to take a supernatural story. So I totally agree with you there.
Yeah, just putting it in your head. There we go, a little bit of light. Just putting it in your head a little bit more that maybe this wasn't a vampire. You know what I mean? Like maybe this is more of the plague kind of thing. And then you have people who are quote unquote insane and, think that there is a Nosferatu or a vampire but they're really dying of the plague. That could possibly be it, right? And I like that he insinuates that a little bit, but we still see Nosferatu. We still know he exists in this story and to these people at least. And so it's interesting. I will say the cinematography is incredible. Yeah. It's gotta get a nomination at least. Yeah. At least, it's so beautiful. I did see in some interviews that they tried to, I don't know if they did it for every scene, but they tried for a lot of scenes to just use candlelight. And so they just kept lighting candles until they had the right exposure because they shot it on film too. That's the other thing. Nice. So they needed a certain amount of exposure and they just kept lighting candles. And sorry if I'm butchering your name, but Jarin, cinematographer, had said that they just kept lighting candles until they got the right exposure and it got messy, but it was worth it in the end. I mean, lighting wise, it's fantastic. I don't think I've seen a movie like this lit like this, like in this way. I don't want to say ever, but like in a very long time. It just feels very gritty, even in the night scenes, which is in kind of like day scenes or dusk scenes, I feel like it's easier to do because you have more to work with, but they have so much depth even in the darkness. Obviously they shallow everything out whenever in that scene that you showed, because it's just her and there's black behind her. Yeah. But then they do these long shots where, that one was a good one where they just sweep around her, almost 300 or I guess 280 degrees or something to the other side, 180 degrees. And then you have her lifting up. It's just so beautiful. The shots are all planned really, really well. And it's gorgeous. So I hope that it at least gets a nod, for that. And I think that Lily Rose Depp was incredible in this. I loved her performance. It needed to be over the top because we needed to feel like she was losing her mind a lot of times. And when she was possessed, I really felt like that's all practical. Like her eyes rolling in the back of her head. I feel like that she really did that, or arching her back. She probably did that. Like it all felt very real. And a lot of those shots, for example, her on the bed, I think when the professor first comes to see her, she has a reaction. She like goes into the and gets possessed or whatever. And it's a long shot. And I remember watching that thinking she did all of that in that one shot. The same as when her and Thomas get back to their house after they're kicked out of their friend's house, and they get back to their house and she has that whole scene where she's possessed again, and then they have sex and stuff. And it had to be a very exhausting film for her. She's crying all the time, and very emotive all the time. I do feel like there were moments where the writing felt, a little too trying to be period. And I don't know if it was because maybe the shots were a little long when they didn't need to be, because there were a lot of oneers. I will call them oneers just because they're long, drawn out shots, but they're not, really, I guess. But, but they didn't need to be. Does that make sense? Yeah. So that's probably one thing for me that I was just, long shots are great when you have something to say at the beginning, in the middle, and in the end, and I think a lot of those were purposeful. For example, when Ellen has her possessions and stuff, staying with her in those moments from the beginning through the whole process to the end, that's cool. I'm in it, but when you just have people walking and talking, and they're just talking about stuff, there's no reason for it to be a long, 2-minute or minute and a half shot. And if nothing else, it kind of, we're not on stage. We have the magic of editing to make sure that one person's performance is 100% and the other person is 100%. And maybe that delivery of that other person is 80 and we need it to be 100. But on another take, that person's is 100. We have the luxury of having the ability to edit that. And I feel like in those moments, it would have been better if there would have been more cuts. If we want to address really quickly, I checked out at the kids, which sucked. It really, really sucked. I knew it was coming.
Yeah.
I knew it. From the moment when I heard, what's his name? Friedrich, I guess it is. When Friedrich had kids, I knew. I was like, oh no. And then when they were saying, oh, there's a monster in our room, I was like, oh God dang it. Oh, here we go. But I didn't know if I was going to see anything. Which really sucked because I think that's on me, maybe. And I don't want to be like that. I don't want to be that way, but I just am. I cannot deal with child violence at all. And I feel like there's almost no reason for it. Like I can't think of any reason to see it. Yeah.
That whole, I'll cut to my chase and just say, as a whole, I did not like this movie. It dragged on. There's a lot of issues with it, but that's a good case in point for me is the kids. It felt like a really lame setup. Like, to your point, the moment, like for me, I was kind of 50-50 on whether or not they were going to die. I wasn't really thinking about it until they started talking about there's a monster under the bed, and it was just such a lame setup for the payoff that we end up getting, which is them getting absolutely mangled, which I don't have a personal reaction to one way or the other. Like, it's not that I enjoy seeing a kid, get killed on screen or anything. But this movie overall unaffected me. Like, I just did not care. Like, those kids got killed and I was like, yeah, okay, that's good. Get them off screen. I'm tired of them. And that was kind of my approach to this whole film. I'd never felt any emotional connection whatsoever to any of the characters. I just did not care if anyone lived or died. And to your point, like, that's not even about the performances. I completely agree. Lily Rose Depp crushed it. Like, and I just think she deserved better than what she got. And if there was anyone that I thought was going to give her that, it was going to be Robert Eggers, because we've seen his work in the past. We've seen The Lighthouse. We've seen The Witch, and he's just unbelievable. Like, he's an incredible writer. And so I was really shocked that he never does any like character development in this story. They don't really set up stakes at all in the story. To the extent that they do, it's Ellen and Thomas love each other, but it's kind of just left at a statement. It's like we never feel their love, right? It's him waking up next to her and her basically saying, "I don't want you to go," and then him leaving. Like, that's the extent of their emotional connection. And then we open that clip we played is the very first shot of the film. It's her calling out to, this ethereal thing that she doesn't even know what she's calling out to. Is my impression. And we don't know why. Like, they don't set that up. Robert Eggers does not set that up whatsoever. It's just her randomly calling out to something. And there's just no emotional connection or foundation to that. And I don't know if he's relying on us just going with it. And because, she's beautiful and she's married, we're supposed to care. I don't know why I'm supposed to care. It's just, I just know that he never earns it. Instead, it feels entirely reliant on tone and atmosphere, which, again, like you said, is beautiful. Like, they shot the devil out of this movie. And I'm with you, man. I think he gets a nomination, for sure. But there is one aspect of the cinematography that goes hand in hand with what you're saying, because you're making that point about how, like, some more edits here does you good. And it's hard to know without looking at the cutting room floor of, did they get that extra coverage that you need to make those extra edits? Or not? Like, is the editor working with what he has or she has? I don't know who cut this thing. Or was that a decision that they were making? Like, oh no, we have that other shots to cut to, but I think we just want to hold here. Either way, it's on Eggers, for sure. But to that extent too, I would add on top of your point that there's times when I felt like we were too wide. Like, I felt like they were trying to do too much of an homage to the, Nosferatu and some of that early work of, old-timey filmmaking. And the emotional power is in the close-up. Like, you save it for those emotional moments. And there were so many times I'm watching Lily Rose Depp just deliver the performance of her life. And I'm like, it's being undercut by the framing, by the composition. We need to get in there, because watching her flail about in those wide shots loses so much emotional connection for me. I'm just like, I don't buy this. Like, there's so much of this movie that's kind of built on like jump scares, like that long, slow candle shot of Anna Harding, played by Emma Corrin. She's just kind of looking around the corners, and it just feels so dated. And you kind of expect, what's coming a mile away. And so much of the rest of the film is just kind of this beware the moon kind of, storytelling of people saying, don't do that, don't go there, don't open that door, that kind of stuff. And the payoffs just don't really give you anything to that. Like, it's a lot of like him sucking blood and heavy breathing and the flailing and the screaming, doors opening by themselves. None of these things feel well delivered or well set up. It just feels like he's expecting us to be scared just because he's provided all this atmosphere and all this musical cueing, which is thick. Like, this whole movie felt like one big musical cue. And I think music cues work better whenever you've done the emotional legwork, and they put you over the top. A good music cue just pushes you over the top. It can never really replace it, that emotional legwork. And so I was flailing in my chair, because everything just felt so melodramatic and completely unearned. And I don't know if that's because he just wanted to tell too much story, but I don't know, maybe another 30 minutes and a little bit different composition choices probably gets me where he wants me to be. Like, I don't think any of those techniques, the blood sucking, the breathing, all that stuff, in and of itself is bad. I think it can pay off. And I think, for me, a good frame of reference to as a counterpoint would be something like Mike Flanagan, House on Hill. What is it? The Haunting of Hill House. The
Yes.
Netflix series, right? Like, those are all similar things that he's doing in there. He's not reinventing the wheel in that series, and I'm on the edge of my seat, and so I think it's an execution thing. I think it goes to Eggers of not doing the emotional legwork, to put us in a place of caring if there's something around the corner for Anna Harding. Like, we never really know her enough to care about what's going to happen to her. And so I think things that he probably should have been doing is having Anna fight for Ellen. Like, you have her husband, Friedrich Harding, played by Aaron Taylor Johnson. Friedrich is trying to kick her out of the house, and he's kind of just throwing her to the doctor. And he's kind of wishy-washy on what he thinks should or shouldn't be happening. But I think you need to bone that up and have Anna pushing back against them, fighting for her best friend or cousin or whatever they are to each other. And now we have more emotional stakes of the pushing and pulling. And therefore we care when Anna gets killed off screen. Like, we don't really see her die. We just kind of cut away and know because of a funeral, right?
Do they ever tell you why Friedrich hates her?
No.
Because, she asks him, she's like, why do you hate me? And he never answers it.
No,
he just kicks them out.
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't remember, but that might have been flung in some dialogue between him and Anna, maybe. I don't know. But this, I don't know. This also feels like a possession film.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was really not off-putting, but just like confusing. Like, is she possessed, or is, because she reaches out to him and he infects her, I guess. But it comes at night, but it just happens to come at these perfect weird times. And you're right. It felt more like a possession thing than it felt like vampire.
Yeah.
I guess. I don't know.
And I don't feel like, and possession films are nearly impossible. Like, I think we've covered one or two of those that have those elements that they nail it, but it's just so hard to do a possession story because everything that's really happening is underneath the surface. It's internal. And so showing and revealing those turns for that character of getting possessed and losing their ability to self-own and then gaining it back, like, those are really hard things to do. And demonstrating that visually, and this is a visual medium, so being able to do that, like, my God, that's really hard work. And again, I just didn't feel it. And so to that end, I just don't think he pulled it off. Yeah, I don't know, man. I struggled through this. I checked out. Where did I check out? It was probably somewhere along the way towards Thomas going out to the castle.
Like, oh, wow. Okay.
Pretty early on, right? Like, that was I think maybe he walks into that town at the base of the mountain and everyone starts laughing at him. And I'm like, why are they laughing? And so I'm thinking, okay, he got set up. This was a prank. And they just called him to the town, to waste his time or something. I don't know. And then it turns to them not wanting him to go up it was just weird. And I was like, what is this? What are we doing? And I just really started revolting and trying to get myself back into the film. And it just never really earned it. And then you get into Count Orlok's like accent. And I was really shocked they did the Transylvanian accent thing, which, as much as you can pull that off, I think they did. I just don't think it can be pulled off. And not in the year of our Lord 2024.
Yeah, I was surprised about that too. And then I thought, oh, how much are we going to hear him? And we hear him a lot. Like, he talks a lot in this film. Maybe too much, honestly. Like I told you, I was a little worried that we weren't going to see him or hear him. But then I was like, okay, we're seeing and hearing him too much. Now, don't show the monster so much. A little bit.
And that early, like, we got a really good look of all his bits and bobs pretty early on.
That's true. Well said.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I think I didn't go in with a lot of expectation one way or the other. Like, I didn't see any trailers walking in. And so I was wanting, because I don't know what vampires are really supposed to represent anymore. I kind of, every once in a while, I'll get an idea about it, or maybe I'll read a snippet about how they're a representation of our fear of them, our mortality, right? And maybe just the fear of losing control. And then watching this and seeing like, oh, it's a representation of what is it, plague? But at the same time, I don't feel like they leaned far enough into the plague aspect. Like, if that's where they were going, I feel like they could have pushed a little bit heavier into there somehow or another. I don't know.
Yeah. Instead of just kind of like touching on it, actually see people like, well, I don't know. Now that I'm thinking about it, it actually felt pretty. Because, by the way, we've seen this movie one time, I think if we saw it again, maybe we would see some different things. I don't know, maybe not. But they do have that one moment where the doctor is analyzing a corpse that died of the plague, quote unquote. But then they see a marking, right? And that marking is what tells the doctor, oh no, this is not the plague. This is Nosferatu. And then he like goes on his tirade or whatever. So, maybe they could have done that a little bit better to make us know this is definitely the plague. But this doctor is looking for specific things to corroborate his assumption that there is a Nosferatu who is there and preying on people. But the problem is that corpse wasn't sought after by Nosferatu to us. It wasn't like he was going around killing a bunch of people. It was the plague, right? Like, so to us, why would he bite this random person and kill this random person? He's only after her, and he's only going to kill people around her because she won't be with him. So who's this random person that gets bit? I don't know. I think you could have hit that home some more, for sure. Like lean on the plague thing.
Yeah. And I don't know if that means letting the plague take the kids and the wife, and then instead of the Count himself, because you're making a good point. Like, him going after these random people isn't as impactful as, because it doesn't make sense for him to be doing that. And so maybe overlapping the plague with what's happening inside the house a little bit more.
Ooh, that's cool.
Gives you that extra dimension. And I don't know. And I think my other issue was we get to the end, and side note, just because I've been harping a little bit, the makeup on Count Orlok, phenomenal. Like,
oh yeah,
excellent work. No question. But we get to that final sequence, and I don't know that they built that bomb very well. Just Lily, I didn't understand that she was dying. I thought this was a trap to get him, to stay past sunrise. That I eventually got. I didn't know that going in. But once, she did he starts noticing the sun coming up and she like pulls him back. That I got. That it was killing her wasn't obvious to me at all. She just kind of, her death felt a little bit sudden. Like she just kind of dies. And I was like, oh, okay, I guess that's that for her. But I wasn't anticipating that. And I think that's what they were trying to get at with the little distraction journey that they were taking Thomas on. All that just felt really muddy to me. I didn't really cleanly connect with all of that. And so it just made the ending so much less dramatic for me. Like, I was just kind of like observing. I felt like an observer the entire time. I just felt like an observer. I never felt like I was going there with these characters and experiencing what they were experiencing. This felt like a lot of telling and not really building and showing on this emotional level. So I think that's my problem. That's my whatever.
Do you think that was because we didn't get those close-ups in those moments? Like, because we did get close-ups, but maybe not in those moments that might have like taken us to that extra place in, when Lily Rose is actually, performing.
I think that was one of like 3 or 4 problems. Certainly one of them. I think the other problems are, I didn't understand Ellen from the get-go. Like, why is she doing what she's doing? And then they kept using dream sequences so much that it was never clear what was real and what wasn't, which I assume that was intentional. But then they kind of reveal later that, no, that kind of really happened. And so that's a a really confusing layer to go through this experience, have a character wake up as if it's a dream, and then confirm that it actually happened later. Like, what the fuck are you doing?
Yeah,
like, make
that's a
a
good point.
commitment to your story. And I just was getting pushed and pulled about what was reality and what wasn't the whole time. And it just made me not connect with anything that was happening after a certain point. Like, I no longer trust, I don't know what's happening and if it's really happening or not. And so that was...
Cause the whole, if they would have established this thing at the very beginning did happen, then, and what happened, you know, like we don't find out until later that like, well, maybe we should have assumed it. I don't know, that she actually like slept with him or they like did it or whatever. We don't find out until she tells her husband, you know, towards the end of the movie that actually happened. So because we don't know if that was real or not at the very beginning, every time we do a dream sequence, we are assuming maybe that didn't happen because she turned out to be okay.
Yeah.
You know, we see that flash of Nosferatu in the face, in her face at the beginning, and then she like wakes up. So we're thinking, okay, that didn't happen. It was a dream. Okay. Yep. Maybe we should have assumed that it was real because it said years later, but that's asking a lot, I think. I think that's asking a lot because then we go into other dream sequences throughout the whole film, and it's just, it's an assumption of an assumption. He's assuming that we're assuming that it is real. And that is where we get into dangerous territory because I like not being told everything.
Sure.
But this is different. This is I'm not being told, but you're assuming that I know. Well, that's a totally different layer of you know, interaction with the film. You can't assume that I know what you're thinking, you know, Mr. Director. You can't assume that because you and we talk about these things every week, and still we're watching this thinking, was this real? Was this not real? I'm not sure. You know, so the random moviegoer who goes to the movies, you know, at best once a month or once every 2 months or 3 months, if that, and just watches Netflix at home, definitely will not get it. So you make up for it by having really good cinematography and you know, really dramatic acting from Lily Rose and everything, but but the assumptions just can't work, you know.
They can't. And to that end, I think it just lacks intention. Like, once you know exactly what you're trying to do, and then not building there's just no character development. Like, and then on top of that, if all that isn't enough, it's not even clear, I don't think, super clear, who is Count Orlok Nosferatu, or is that this whole other being entity? Like, there's just so much confusion. And I think that's a writing problem. Like, everyone in here, and my God, we haven't talked about Ralph Ineson, you know, yet, but I love seeing this guy on screen. Like, he is so underrated. And I'm hoping he gets more opportunities to just take center stage because God, is he good. We've now seen him, you know, apart from Game of Thrones, like the witch being the father, like completely destroy everyone on screen. And now watching him step up and be a different type of character altogether. Like, he's so good. And so I don't know. I think this was just a half-built bomb and it needed to be rethought. I don't feel like he went in with the right intentions. I think all his intentions were about everything visual and not enough about what story am I really telling. Because it just doesn't feel like he committed to any one particular thing. It just felt like a lot of assumptions on his part about what the audience was going to go with and what they were going to experience. And I don't know if it's because he's not showing people his work, you know, you never know. But someone, hopefully somewhere along the way, needs to step in and say, okay, I don't understand why she's doing this. Like, our first scene starts with a really massive character decision that we have no frame of reference for, like that's a red flag. We need to rewind and establish who she is. And I mean, it's tried and true about, the hero's journey, is this idea, and whatever you make of the rest of the story, I don't care. But whenever you start the hero's journey, and most stories start like this, you establish the world that we're living in. And then something happens. It's to give you contrast. Because once this thing happens, you have a frame of reference for the characters that are going to be encountering that thing. Whether it's they themselves make a decision like, oh, my kid is dying and I need money and therefore I'm going to go rob a bank. Like, if you start with them robbing a bank, you don't really care whether or not they succeed or not because you don't know why they're doing it. Establishing why someone's making a dramatic decision gives you so much frame of reference and momentum for the rest of your story that you roll the dice. And to be fair, I might be the outlier. Like, I still don't know how much you liked or didn't like this movie. But everyone that I'm seeing on Letterboxd is like giving this thing 4 stars out of 5. And I don't really understand it. Other than people wanted something beautiful to look at. And they certainly got that with the cast and the visuals. Like, it's a really nice looking film, man. But that's not what I was really gunning for, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen mixed. I have seen some 4 out of 5, that kind of thing. But I've also seen some like, look, it's beautiful, but I don't ever want to watch it again. Which is not really good, to me. Like, a great movie makes you want to go back and watch it again. I think we've talked about this before. Makes you think at the beginning and think at the end, right? It's the first and the last shot, right? How are they leaving you? How's it leaving you? And not every movie has to be that way, but I think this film could have been so interesting had he leaned into things that we've never seen before when it comes to the lore of vampires, right? It doesn't mean that Nosferatu can't exist. He can exist. It doesn't mean that we have to never see him. We can see him, but maybe it is about the lore, and it's less about Nosferatu himself, because we've already seen movies, stories, and versions of Nosferatu, Dracula, like vampires. We've already seen that, but they're usually told from the perspective of the time period being correct in their assumption or in the lore existing, right? Yeah. And I say that because what if this story it's not correct and he doesn't exist? 'Cause he doesn't, okay? And in 1800 or 1830s or whatever, in Germany, they assumed that or there was lore that was handed down, and some people started believing it because people were dying for strange reasons and strange markings, and so maybe this lore was correct. But what if it wasn't? And what if some people who were actually crazy believed that it was?
That's great, because there's that story of the doctor who was committed after trying to convince everyone about germ theory.
Right. Right. I mean, then it's interesting because it's completely different. And it doesn't mean that we can't see Nosferatu. Yeah. That's the other cool thing. We can totally, but he only exists in Ellen's mind, right? And
nice.
How she dies is from the plague, or maybe rats are eating her or something. Like, point being, I think the story could have been told from a different perspective, and it would have been a little bit more interesting, and still could have stayed satisfying. Could have been satisfied as a viewer seeing Nosferatu, hearing him, seeing his interaction with her, even though it doesn't really exist. And then at the end, you have this reveal that he never existed. maybe
Yeah.
even.
Yeah.
But he did exist in the story, and we see him. Everyone sees him at the very end and stuff. So, anyway, it's definitely like a I would say probably a 5 or 6 out of 10 for me. I'm gonna give it a 6 just because of the cinematography and Lily Rose Depp. I cannot wait to see what else she does.
Yeah.
She's absolutely fantastic. I thought Bill Skarsgård did an excellent. He totally disappeared,
Yeah,
completely. And if that was his, I wouldn't be surprised if that was his actual voice. I mean, I'm sure they affected it and everything, but like he's just fantastic at what he does, right? I thought, for the most part, the acting was really good from everyone. I thought that the writing fell flat in places and was just kind of like, kind of period campy at moments. But with what they had, I thought that everyone did a really great job. Even Aaron Taylor Johnson, whom I'm not like crazy about him, but I thought he did an excellent job at his role. So yeah, I would give it a 6 out of 10.
Nice. Yeah. I'm probably like a 5 out of 10 or like a 2 out of 5. It's just, I struggled. I don't think, to your point, I couldn't watch this again. Like, not only am I not excited about rewatching it, I made a decision to not watch this a second time. Like I normally do. That's, very rarely do I not go and sit and do a full note session. And I just was like, man, can't. Life's a little too short. But this is also a really good case for why I will never do real estate. Like the clients are the worst.
Oh, it's so good.
Oh my God. Yeah, so that's kind of all my notes just kind of boil down to that. Like it's just muddy. I don't think there was enough intention and put into the characters themselves. Everything felt like some dominoes that were falling after a decision was made that we never had any context for. We needed whatever that is, 5 minutes, 20 minutes. I don't know. A lot of reworking, I think, to this whole thing. But regardless, I still love Robert Eggers for going out and trying to create something original. Like even if this is inspired by, Bram Stoker at the end of the day, it's still really cool that he's taking swings, and this felt like a swing. This didn't feel like a sure thing. And so, hat tip, big respect. Yeah. So I'll leave it there. What are you going to recommend this week, man?
So this week I was kind of going through looking at the cast of this film and seeing like other films that have been inspiring over the years for me. And you got to go with Willem Dafoe because his catalog is just fantastic. And he's just, I just adore Willem Dafoe and everything he does. I don't know. I just can't think he misses. I don't think he misses ever. And even if he did, I'd be fine with it. I just love seeing him on screen, honestly. So I went back into his catalog. I'm going to recommend Platoon.
Ooh.
Which I can't believe that we haven't done or recommended.
Yeah.
Honestly, I was like, oh, for sure we've recommended this, but we haven't. So yeah, it's from 1986. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. So yeah, I'm going to recommend Platoon.
Dude, well done. I'm going to recommend another vampire movie that I think does a great job of balancing the drama with the lore of vampires. And it's called Only Lovers Left Alive. It's, I think, Tom Hiddleston and Tilda Swinton. And it's just so good. It's just, kind of takes place in a house, and it's these vampires learning to live with each other after however long it's been them living together.
Wow.
So it's, I love it. Yeah. So Only Lovers Left Alive. And stay tuned for next week. We have a listener request. We're going to go back about a decade and watch Ron Howard's Rush. Shout out to Uva. Stay tuned for that. And if you don't forget, leave us a note. If you want to subscribe and drop us a review, we'd appreciate it. And let us know if there's a film you want to cover. And so if you want to comment on this episode, you can do that at thepestlepodcast.com/Nosferatu.
Why'd you laugh?
I was like, you can try.
You could try. Oh, man. And our quote of the day is from Anne Rice. To write something, you have to risk making a fool of yourself. Great quote, man.
Yeah. I mean, obviously Anne Rice did the Interview with the Vampire series with Lestat and all that. And that's so true. Like, it's hard creating and making art because it's such a vulnerable thing to do, to put yourself out there and say, I made this. It's really easy. I was watching Sing Street last night, and there's this moment early on in the film where this kid is trying to learn how to play music, and he does a cover of a song by whoever, I don't even forget. But he shows it to his big brother. He's like, yeah, what do you think? And his brother takes the tape and crushes it. He like breaks it. He's like, this stinks. He's like, I could have reused that. And he's like, no.
It is done. It is over.
It's over.
Painted.
He's like, that's not rock and roll. Rock and roll is taking a risk. And that's art, man. It's taking a risk. Whether or not it succeeds or not, you know what? You did something on your own. You didn't just try to copy pasta someone else's work. You said, you know what? I'm inspired by other people's work, but this is me. I'm putting myself out there. And so I love Robert Eggers for doing that because it's easy to play the hits. It's easy to just say, you know what? Okay, I'm just going to adapt the novel straight up. And he's like, no, I'm going to make this my own, and here's how I'm going to do it. And I love him for that because it's so hard to put yourself out there when you're creating, and you do have to risk making a fool of yourself. And so hat tip to everyone who's doing that, especially Robert Eggers.
100%. And the guy has wins, all over the place. I mean, he's one of the best to do it. So
Yes.
Nowadays, so I couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. Yeah, just make something, guys.
make something.
It doesn't matter if people like us get on here and we have a podcast and we say we just didn't really like this. We do a pretty good job, I think, of making sure that we look at something for what it is, and that we say at the very end or during, this wasn't for us, but it's incredible that this got made.
Yeah.
And this is the good part. This is a good part, but this is where it just didn't land for us. We are not critics. We are just pulling these things apart to say, why did this land? Why did we not like this? We're asking questions here. So that's really it. But Robert Eggers is fantastic at what he does, and this just wasn't for us. Yeah. But go watch The Witch.
One of the greatest movies that'll go down. Like, people will still be watching The Witch in 50 years.
Yes.
No question.
No question. I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
Oh.
Anyway, thank you guys so much for staying with us. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode. Like Wes said, please leave us a comment if you'd like to. Subscribe, review us wherever you get your podcasts. And if there's a film you'd like to see us pick apart and talk about, please let us know. Who knows? Maybe one day we'll do it. Until next time, I'm Todd.
I'm Wes.
Go watch some movies.